Hello, my name is Saleemul. I'm the director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development at the Independent University, Bangladesh, in Dhaka, Bangladesh, where I'm speaking from. And I'd like to share with you some of the activities that are taking place in Bangladesh and other least developed countries and in the South Asia region on dealing with the impacts of climate change, which are now becoming manifest and visible, particularly sea level rise in the coastal areas, salinity intrusion into freshwater zones, increased intensity of cyclones. We had a super cyclone in this region a few months ago called Amphan that hit India and Bangladesh, and we had major floods in Bangladesh just a few weeks ago. These are all manifestations of the fact that this year, 2020, is clearly the year in which not only COVID-19 pandemic is hitting the world, but the impacts of human-induced climate change are also becoming quite visible all over the world, including in our part of the world in the region. And even it's hitting developed countries like the United States, where they're having wildfires in California and Oregon, as well as in the state of Louisiana, where they're being hit by uh, recurrent hurricanes, I think up to the 28th hurricane of the season now. These are all manifestations of the fact that global mean temperatures have gone up well above 1 degree since pre-industrial and pre-industrial revolution, and that this is now interfering with the global climatic system and causing these kinds of extreme weather events all over the world. And therefore, from this year onwards, 2020 onwards, we will have to face these. We will have to deal with them. We will have to adapt to them. Now, in Bangladesh, here in Bangladesh, in my country, we have known this for the last 10 years, and we have been planning for this for the last 10 years. We have a national climate change strategy and action plan, which the government of Bangladesh has prepared with experts from Bangladesh. And it has a number of activities that have been identified that need to be taken up in different sectors. The government ministries as well as civil society have all been taking many of these adaptation actions. The government of Bangladesh has been allocating in the order of $100 million a year in the national budget towards a climate change trust fund that has been funding hundreds of activities now. And we have been going up a very significant learning curve in terms of dealing with the impacts of climate change. Just to give a couple of examples, in the coastal area in Bangladesh, where we are already seeing salinity intrusion into the groundwater as well as the surface water system, many of the traditional varieties of crops, particularly rice varieties, are no longer able to survive. But our research scientists, our rice research scientists, have come up with at least a dozen new varieties that are saline tolerant, which are now being grown by millions of farmers in millions of hectares around the coast. However, there is a limit to how much rice can be adapted or bred into becoming more saline tolerant, because the salinity is going faster than the breeders can make tolerant varieties. So when they reach the limit of growing rice, they can then switch, and they are switching in a very big way, to growing shrimp and crabs in some cases. Shrimp can be grown in saline water, and very large areas in low-lying coastal Bangladesh is now converted from rice to shrimp, which has some negative environmental consequences, but nevertheless allows livelihoods for these people to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Similarly, there are adaptations going on in terms of providing fresh drinking water by rainwater harvesting. Millions of people in the coastal area now harvest rainwater from on their rooftops regularly, and then are able to use that for drinking water purposes during the dry season when there is no more rain. Similarly, in the northern part of the country, we have a dryland part in the Barind, where people are working on how to preserve water, conserve water. And in the Howrah region, in the northeastern part, where we are prone to flash floods, people are adapting to the causation of flash floods and dealing with them more effectively. Perhaps the most important and most successful adaptation in Bangladesh has been for cyclones. Bangladesh now has one of the best cyclone warning and evacuation systems. We can warn and evacuate well over 2.5 million people. And I mentioned the super cyclone Amphan that occurred in May. Uh, the death toll was only about a few dozen, whereas in past decades, when we had super cyclones, we would have death tolls in the tens of thousands, indeed, even over hundreds of thousands sometimes, that has occurred in the past. Nowadays, with the cyclone warning systems and the cyclone shelters that have been built all over the coast, people can actually get the information on cyclones coming in. They can go to the shelters, take shelter while the cyclone comes and passes. The cyclone still does a lot of damage, causes a lot of damage to crops and infrastructure and housing, but it doesn't cause as many deaths as it used to, as people can evacuate and take shelter for the duration of the cyclone. And Bangladesh has probably one of the best, if not the best, cyclone warning and shelter systems in the whole world that has been well adapted to deal with the impacts of climate change. However, as I said, with the cyclones, we have been successful in bringing the death rate down, but we still have a lot of damage, loss and damage to infrastructure, crops, and people's houses, etc. At the same time, floods are occurring more frequently. We have a very long record of floods in the Ganges and the Brahmaputra rivers, the two major rivers that flow through Bangladesh. Uh, Going back many hundreds of years during the British colonial period and even before that in the Mughal period. And the magnitudes of floods, a major bad intensity flood, usually occurred once in 20 years. The 1 in 20 year event used to happen almost as clockwork once every 20 years over the last 400 or 500 years. However, in the last 20 years, the 1 in 20 year intensity flood has become at least 4 times in the last 20 years, perhaps even 5 times if we count the last one that occurred just a few weeks ago. So the 1 in 20 year intensity flood event is now more like a 1 in 5 year flood event. That means we have to be better prepared for it. It's not going to come after another 20 years, but rather after 3 or 4 years. And every few years, we're going to have to deal with an incoming flood. And so the impacts of climate change are now becoming visible, manifest, impacting people all over the world, not just in Bangladesh. I just use Bangladesh as an example. And people are learning to adapt and deal with these impacts all over the world, Bangladesh and in South Asia and neighboring India and Nepal and other countries in this region, as well as the least developed countries in Asia and Africa as well, in sub-Saharan Africa. And we have set up a network of universities called the Least Developed Countries Universities Consortium on Climate Change, where we are sharing knowledge, South-South exchange of information, knowledge, particularly on adaptation to climate change and particularly for community-based adaptation for the most vulnerable countries. Now, we feel that adaptation to climate change is something that all countries are going to have to do, including the developed countries, including the United Kingdom, and there is much that we can learn from each other in terms of adaptation to climate change. And so the UK can learn from Bangladesh because we've been doing it for a long time, and we can learn from the UK because the UK has a much better, higher levels of technology and knowledge that they can share with us. So one of the opportunities that we have going forward is for sharing knowledge in a form of global solidarity between the North and the South, between the UK and Bangladesh, between Bangladesh and the UK, on a much more equitable manner. It's not the UK coming to rescue Bangladesh, but rather UK and Bangladesh working together, learning from each other, and sharing that knowledge with the rest of the world to try and tackle a global problem like global climate change, which is affecting all countries around the world. And I think there is a great deal of potential for uh, British scientists, students, universities, young people to link up with Bangladeshi students, scientists, universities, and young people to try and find lessons that we can apply and share and take forward globally to be able to tackle the global problem of climate change, which is going to affect every country in the world sooner or later. And the sooner we can get together and learn from each other to tackle it, the better off we'll all be. Thank you.